That morning my son-in-law laughed at me across the Thanksgiving table. Not a quiet laugh. Not the kind you try to hide behind a napkin. He looked at my daughter, then at my wife, then back at me, and he said, "No offense, but dead land is dead land. You can't polish a rock and call it a diamond." My wife didn't say anything. That was the part that stayed with me. Not what he said. What she didn't say. My father died in March, a Tuesday, the kind of grey Tuesday that doesn't feel like it belongs to any season. He was 81. He'd lived in the same county his whole life, worked 30 years at a feed distribution company, retired with a modest pension, and owned two things outright: the house he shared with my mother until she passed, and 11 acres of scrubland out on Route 9, about 40 minutes east of Rono. The house went to my sister. That made sense. She lived close, checked on him, driven him to his appointments, sat with him during the last winter when he couldn't drive anymore. She earned it. The 11 acres went to me. The estate attorney read it in a room that smelled like old carpet and printer toner. My sister squeezed my hand when he said it. She thought she was comforting me. 11 acres of unimproved land, located at parcel 44A, Route 9 corridor, Botetourt County, the attorney read. No structures, no utilities connected. Agricultural zoning. Assessed value $42,000. $42,000. My son-in-law, who had come along uninvited and sat in the corner with his arms crossed the whole time, exhaled through his nose when he heard that number. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. My daughter put her hand on my arm on the drive home. She meant well. She always means well. "Dad," she said carefully, "you know you can just sell it. The timber alone might be worth something." "There's no timber alone might be worth something." "There's no timber," I said. "It's scrub, juniper and red clay." She went quiet after that. "I want to tell you something about that land before I go further, because it matters. My father took me out there once when I was about 9 years old. We drove out on a Saturday in his Ford pickup, just the two of us, and he parked to the edge of the lot where a rusted metal fence post marked the corner. The ground was dry and cracked. Nothing grew there that looked intentional. I remember thinking it looked like a place where things went to stop trying. He stood at the edge of it with his hands in his pockets and didn't say much. After a while he said, "Your grandfather bought this for $400 in 1959. Everybody told him he was a fool." I waited for the rest of the story. He said he just had a feeling, my father said, and that he walked back to the truck. That was it. That was the whole story. I was 9, and I didn't understand it, and then I forgot about it for 50 years, until the estate attorney handed me a manila envelope with the deed inside, and suddenly I was 9 years old again, standing at the edge of that red clay watching my father put his hands in his pockets. I'm 63 now. I retired 2 years ago from a career in civil engineering, not the glamorous end of it. No bridges, no skyscrapers. I spent 31 years reviewing permits, reading drainage reports, cross-referencing easement documentation for municipal projects in Western Virginia. My colleagues used to joke that I was the only engineer they knew who actually read the appendices. My wife used to say the same thing, but not as a joke. "You read everything," she told me once, "like you're waiting for something to be wrong." I never knew how to explain that I read everything because things often are wrong, and nobody catches it until somebody quiet enough to be patient finally sits down and looks. After I retired, I filled my time with woodworking, mostly. Small things. Cutting boards, a bench for the back porch, a toy chest for my granddaughter. My son-in-law, who flips commercial properties and drives a car I couldn't have afforded at the peak of my career, once watched me sand a tabletop for 40 minutes and said, "Don't you get bored?" I told him no. He looked like he didn't believe me. 3 weeks after the reading of the will, I drove out to Route 9 alone. I parked where my father used to park, at the rusted fence post. I walked the perimeter in old boots, taking my time. The scrub was thicker than I remembered. The clay had that particular orange-red color that means iron-heavy soil, low in organic matter, hard to cultivate. I understood why nobody had ever done anything with it. But I noticed something. Along the eastern edge of the property, running roughly parallel to the road for about 400 feet, The ground had a different quality, harder, more compacted. The scrub thinned there, and the soil had a greyish stripe in it that didn't match the surrounding clay. It was subtle. If you weren't looking for it, you'd walk right over it. I crunched down and pressed my palm flat against it. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I took photographs. Then I went home and pulled out my father's manila envelope and spread everything on the kitchen table. The deed. The survey, the county tax records. The folded insert I almost set aside. I unfolded it. It was a copy of a recorded easement, filed in 1987, granted to the Commonwealth of Virginia, Department of Virginia, for subsurface utility corridor access. The language was dense and technical, the kind of language that makes most people's eyes slide right off the page. I read it 4 times. Then I made a pot of coffee and read it again. My wife came into the kitchen around 9 that night and found me at the table surrounded by papers and my old engineering reference books. "Come to bed," she said. "I need another hour." She looked at the papers. "It's $42,000 of scrubland, Frank. You're going to lose sleep over it." Frank. That's me. She uses my full name when she's tired and not quite arguing, but getting there. "Go to bed," I said. "I'll be up." She left, and I kept reading. Here is what I eventually pieced together. In 1986, the Commonwealth of Virginia had acquired a subsurface easement corridor through several private properties along the Route 9 stretch, not for road widening, but for utility line access, specifically for a fiber optic trunk line that was being laid as part of an early state telecommunications infrastructure project. Most landowners at the time had no idea what fiber optics were or what they'd eventually become. The compensation had been modest. My grandfather had taken the easement payment, filed it, and apparently never thought about it again. But the easement hadn't expired. It was still active, and the language of the original 1987 agreement, I read it so many times I nearly had it memorized, included a renewal clause that required the Commonwealth to renegotiate compensation rates every 15 years, adjusted for current fair market value of the corridor access. The last renegotiation would have been 2017. There was no record of it in my father's files, which meant either the Commonwealth had reached out and received no response, or they hadn't reached out at all, or something in between. I didn't know which. But I knew that clause existed, and I knew that the current fiber infrastructure along that corridor. I looked it up, spent 2 hours cross-referencing state telecom records and public utility databases, had been significantly upgraded since 1987. The line running through that eastern edge of my father's land was now part of an active regional backbone network. I sat back and looked at the ceiling, the fair market rate for an active subsurface fiber easement on a regional backbone corridor, per linear foot, per year. I'd reviewed enough municipal easement agreements in my career to know the range. I did the math on a notepad. Then I did it again because I didn't believe it. I didn't tell my wife that night. I didn't tell her the next day either. I needed to verify everything before I said a word to anyone, because I know how it sounds when a 63-year-old retired engineer tells his family he found something valuable in a piece of scrubland that everyone has already written off. I know exactly how it sounds. I hired an attorney, not the estate attorney, someone who specialized in easement and right-of-way law. Her office was in Roanoke, on the second floor of a building that smelled like good coffee. She was younger than my daughter, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the particular focused expression of someone who has spent years reading documents that other people threw away. I put the easement on her desk. She read it. She looked up. She read it again. "Where did you get this?" she said. "My father's files. It was folded inside the deed packet." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The renewal was due in 2017. Do you know if anyone contacted the prior owner?" "My father," I said. "And no, I don't believe anyone did." She pulled up something on her computer, typed for a while. Then she turned the screen so I could see it. The Commonwealth of Virginia, Department of Transportation, had an active listing in their easement management system for that parcel. Status, renewal pending. Contact attempted 2017, no response. "They tried once," she said. "Sent a letter. If there was no response, the easement technically stays active at the original 1987 rate. until formally renegotiated or disputed. What was the 1987 rate? She looked at the document. $412 per year. I nodded. What's the current fair market rate? I asked. She looked at me over her reading glasses. For an active fiber backbone corridor of this type, running through a parcel of this location and length? She paused, renegotiated to current market. You're looking at somewhere between $28,000 and $35,000 per year, depending on how hard you negotiate. I let that sit in the room for a moment. And the back payments, I said, since the 2017 renewal was never completed. She took her glasses off. That, she said slowly, is going to be a very interesting conversation with the Commonwealth. I drove home that afternoon with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. I thought about my grandfather, who bought that land for $400 in 1959 because he had a feeling. I thought about my father, standing at the edge of it with his hands in his pockets, not explaining. I thought about 31 years of reading appendices that other people skipped. I thought about Thanksgiving, and my son-in-law's laugh, and my wife's silence. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I felt something quieter than that, like when you've been searching for a number that doesn't balance in a long column of figures, and you finally find it, and it's exactly where you thought it would be, and you just close the ledger for a minute and breathe. My daughter called that evening. She called most evenings, which I appreciated, even when her calls were partly reconnaissance on behalf of her husband. "How are you doing, Dad?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Have you thought any more about the land?" Kevin was saying. Kevin is my son-in-law. He was saying he might know a developer who'd take it off your hands. For the assessed value, probably. Maybe a little more. "Tell Kevin I appreciate it," I said. "So you're thinking about it?" "I'm always thinking," I said. "That's the thing about retirement." She laughed a little uncertain and let it go. The negotiation with the Commonwealth took 4 months. My attorney handled most of it. I sat in on 2 meetings, said almost nothing both times, and let her do what she was very good at doing. The state's right-of-way office had not expected someone to show up with a correctly interpreted 1987 easement clause, a current market rate analysis prepared by an independent telecommunications infrastructure appraiser, and a quiet but specific inquiry into why the 2017 renewal had been handled with a single letter and no follow-up. They counted twice. We held. Final agreement. $26,400 per year, adjusted every 5 years to CPI. Retroactive compensation for the 2017 to present period, $61,200, paid as a lump sum. They also agreed, in the formal language of the settlement, that the easement would be documented as belonging to the current landowner, me, with all renewal rights clearly recorded. I signed on a Thursday in September. My attorney shook my hand and said, "You know, most people would have looked at that deed and seen scrubland." "Most people don't read the inserts," I said. I told my wife that night. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, the way we do in September when the evenings are still warm enough. She had her tea. I had mine. I told her the whole thing. From the folded easement to the attorney to the settlement. I laid it out plainly. The way I used to present findings in permit reviews. No drama. Just the facts in order. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me when you first found it?" "Because I didn't know if it was anything yet," I said. "I didn't want to get your hopes up." She looked at her tea. "Or mine, to talk you out of it." I didn't answer that. She looked at me. "I'm sorry," she said. "About Thanksgiving. About not saying anything when Kevin, it's all right." "It's not," she said. "You were sitting right there." We sat with that for a while. The crickets were going. Somewhere down the block a dog was making a fuss about something that turned out to be nothing. $26,000 a year, she said finally, almost to herself. From a piece of red clay. And adjustments every 5 years, I said. She laughed. It was a small laugh, surprised out of her. Then she reached over and put her hand on mine and didn't say anything else. That was enough. I called my daughter 2 weeks later and told her she could pass along to Kevin that I wouldn't be selling the land. There was a pause. "Dad, are you sure?" Because Kevin actually had someone reach out and, "I'm sure," I said. "Tell him thank you." Another pause. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. Actually, better than fine. She came over for dinner that Sunday. Just her and the grandkids, without Kevin. We didn't talk about the land. We played in the backyard after dinner, and I pushed my granddaughter on the rope swing I'd hung from the old oak last summer, and she screamed the way kids do when something is exactly as fun as it should be. My daughter watched from the porch steps with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee and said, "You seem lighter." "I'm the same," I said. "No," she said. "You're different. Something happened." "Something happened," I agreed. She waited. I gave my granddaughter another push. "Your great-grandfather bought some land in 1959 because he had a feeling," I said. Turns out he was right. Just took about 65 years for everyone to catch up. My daughter was quiet for a while. Then, was Kevin wrong about it? Kevin was wrong about it. Kevin was wrong about it, I said simply. Not unkindly, just as a fact. She nodded slowly. She's smart. She understood more than I said. In November, I drove back out to Route 9. It was a cold morning, the kind where the sky is white, the light is flat, and everything looks a little sharper than usual. I parked at the rusted fence post. I walked the eastern edge where the ground runs hard and grey. 400 feet of subsurface corridor, carrying signals at the speed of light, through the same red clay that everyone had written off as worthless for 65 years. You'd never know it was there. It looks exactly like everything else. Just a slight difference in the color of the soil. A little harder under your boot. I stood at the corner for a while with my hands in my pockets. I don't know if I was thinking about my father or my grandfather or neither. Maybe I was just standing there the way they stood there, looking at something that didn't announce itself, that didn't ask to be recognized, that just waited. My attorney had sent the first annual payment paperwork the week before. Everything in order. $26,400. First disbursement in January. I bent down and pressed my palm flat against the ground the way I had the first day. Still cold. Still hard. Still the same land nobody wanted. I stood up, put my hands back in my pockets, and walked to my truck. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be true. My father knew that. His father knew it before him. Now I know it too. I keep coming back to something my attorney said the day we signed the settlement paperwork. She said most people would have looked at that deed and seen scrubland. She meant it as a compliment. But I've been turning it over ever since because I don't think it was really about seeing. I think it was about being willing to look. There's a version of me that doesn't drive out to Route 9 the first afternoon. That takes the deed, puts it in a drawer, and calls Kevin's developer contact by the end of the week. That version of me was tired, a little embarrassed, maybe a little defeated. That version of me had just watched his wife stay silent at Thanksgiving while his son-in-law laughed, and had decided that the world had already made up its mind, but I'd spent 31 years reading things other people set aside. Not because I was smarter, because I'd learned early that the truth of something isn't usually written in the headline. It's in the footnote, the attachment, the clause nobody thought mattered. That habit wasn't glamorous. It didn't make me interesting at dinner parties. But it was honest work, and I'd done it honestly, and it turned out that counted for something when it mattered most. I think about Kevin sometimes, not with bitterness. I want to be clear about that. He's not a bad man. He's just a man who learned to move fast and trust his first read on things. In his world, that works. Properties get flipped, deals get done, and the person who hesitates loses. But there's a cost to that kind of speed. And the cost is that you sometimes sign away 65 years of your family's inheritance with a shrug, because you were too busy calculating momentum to notice what was already there. That's not a character flaw so much as a choice, and choices had weight. Every one of them. What I found in that manila envelope wasn't luck. My grandfather made a decision in 1959 that nobody respected. My father carried that land for decades without knowing why. I inherited it at 63 and almost let other people's certainty talk me out of looking closer. The whole chain only held because each of us, in our own quiet way, stayed the course. Not heroically, not loudly, just steadily. The way you stay the course when you believe that doing the right thing with the information in front of you eventually leads somewhere true. I'm not the same man I was before March. I don't mean that in some grand transformed sense. I still wake up early, drink my coffee, go out to the workshop. But I carry myself a little differently, not because of the money, though I won't pretend the money doesn't matter. Because I learned something about patience I hadn't fully understood before, that staying quiet while you figure something out is not the same as having nothing to say. That the most important work sometimes looks from the outside like nothing at all. That intelligence without the willingness to sit with difficulty is just cleverness, and cleverness gets bored and cuts corners, and corners are where things get missed. My granddaughter asked me last week what I do when I go out to walk the land. She's 7. She wanted a good answer. I told her I go to check on something her great-great-grandfather planted a long time ago. She thought about that. Then she said, "What did he plant?" "Patience," I said. She wasn't entirely satisfied with that answer. But she'll understand it someday fine with that answer. But she'll understand it someday. I'm more sure of that than almost anything.